There are a ton of mistakes that players are making with every single role in Season 2. That's why in this video, we're going to go over 3 tips for every single role and give you tips and tricks so that you can dominate on tank, DPS, and support. But special thanks to the sponsor of this video, Dps. They sent me both their C7M chair and their E7 Pro standing desk, and I love both of these, but let's talk about the chair first. You see, I've tried every type of gaming and office chair, but this chair is extremely comfortable to the point where I can sit on it for very long periods of time. I want you to take a look at this latex seat cushion that is basically memory foam that feels incredibly comfortable to sit on. Not to mention, there is both neck and back support that is adjustable. This means I can game and stream for long periods of time and it will still be very comfortable with no pain at all, and with a fully 5D armrest that can go in any rotation, completely customizable. Regardless of how I want to position myself, I can do that comfortably and still game. Honestly, if I were to describe the chair with one word, it would be premium, because everything feels incredibly high quality, from the cushion to the backing to the armrest to everything. I think FlexiSpot knocked it out of the park with this new chair, and with the 10-year warranty and a 30-day return-free policy, then you gotta check it out. Links for the chair will be in the description down below. But let's talk about the E7 Pro standing desk that is just really impressing me. So first off, I never had a standing desk before, but after using it, I realized how much not only I enjoy a standing desk, but I need it, because you can consistently change the height for whatever scenario you need. If you're playing a game for a long period of time, your neck starts to hurt, you can adjust it up or down like I do here. If you've been sitting for a long period of time and you want to get the blood pumping, well, you can push it all the way up and you can stand and still work or still game. And this desk is made of solid bamboo and it is incredibly sturdy and high quality. I'm pushing right here with all my weight and all my strength and I cannot move it at all. Thick material with automotive grade steel with those thickened legs. This thing is made to last and you can see it in the build quality here. If you're a gamer or content creator, you need high quality chairs and high quality desks, and FlexiSpot delivers in both these regards. I cannot recommend them enough. Go to FlexiSpot right now in the links down below and check out both the chair and the desk. Tons of customizable options so you can get it any way you like. Check it out right now in the links down below. Now first we got to talk about tank, and tanking is one of the most difficult things to do correctly, but one of the most impactful things, and in my opinion the most impactful role when played properly. That being said, a lot of people are under this assumption that you can't carry on tank. So how do you actually carry on the tanking role? What can you do? And one of the things that I see the most, and one of the biggest mistakes I see, is that tanks are far too passive at enforcing their will. What I mean by this is that there's a lot of tank players who will often play on the front line. They're creating space, they're creating presence, they're touching objectives, but they're never enforcing what they want to do. They're never getting high kills, they're never forcing people off of angles, and ultimately they are a watcher in a game that they're playing. And that means that you're gonna win when you have good teammates and you're gonna lose when you have bad teammates, and that's about it. But the reality of it is, regardless of the tank that you're playing, you can be extremely aggressive at accomplishing certain goals that force enemies to play to your tempo and to your pace of play. Let me give you an example. If I'm playing Strange and I'm fighting on the front line, I'm trading blows with their tank, I'm pushing and pulling, I'm applying pressure. If my team gets picks, I push in. If my team is down people, I pull back. I'm doing the job of a tank, and you know, I'm going in and out of the front line, so you could say I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. However, I want you to imagine a very different situation where maybe there's a Namor and we're poking him out, he bubbles to the high ground. You fly up on Strange, you fight him, you burst him down, you get a kill. Then you fall down, you proceed to push past the enemy tank, start poking the back line, the enemy tanks peel you, you back up, and your team collapses. You see how in this situation, you're being extremely aggressive with the types of plays you're going for. You're enforcing your will, you're going for direct plays, and this is very similar to something that like a DPS player would do. And you might think, I'm a tank, I have different responsibilities, but that is one of the ways that I think tank players mess up the most, where they completely throw away the idea of playmaking for these responsibilities, and it really holds you back. Look at a top level Magneto player playing in high rank, and they're playing very specific, very direct, very hero shooter. They're doing a lot of their responsibilities. Look at a high ranked Magneto player smurfing, and what are they doing? They're running around and killing everybody. And this is because they are taking whatever is given to them. They are taking all the space that is given to to them. They are pushing as much as they can get away with, and they are playmaking constantly. And if they're not getting punished for it, they're going to keep playmaking. And that's what you need to think about on tank. I want a lot of you to start to limit test a lot more, where in the game itself, you see what you can get away with, and you pick and poke out the lobby to find what the enemy is going to punish you for. There's a lot of times where you can get away with a lot more than you think you can, and you're playing overly safe, and you might be saying, hey, if I play aggressive, no one's going to support me, no one's going to heal me. That's the thing. The more pressure you output, oftentimes, the less resources you need, because enemies can't trade blows with you fairly. When you walk on an off angle, force out a DPS, or kill them instantly, you're not taking that much damage. And I really want to use this opportunity to enforce the idea that tanks can carry extremely hard, but you have to adopt this mindset. But that being said, there are some best solo tanks that you can play. Certain tanks that I think are better at carrying in general. Solo-oriented tanks are going to be better the lower in rank you go, or tanks that can operate with a lot of freedom and flexibility. So a character like Thor, while every tier list you see that he's not doing so hot, in the lower elos, he actually shines more than almost any other tank, because you have a freedom of decision making. You can go anywhere, you can do anything, you can fight people, you can win 1v1s, and that's really where a tank's strength lies. In a 1v1, tanks don't lose them. Like, they just don't lose them against squishies. So it's extremely strong when games get super simplified and the game doesn't feel as much as a hero shooter as it does a deathmatch. Tanks get to create unfair fights where there never is a fair fight between you and that Moon Knight. When you fly up to him as Thor, he's never going to win that, and that's what you can abuse. So it becomes more of a, can I create these situations that I just don't lose in? Can I create these unfair duels consistently? And you're going to win a lot of games that way. But the next thing that you need to think about is how to properly fight on tank. What are you supposed to be doing in the mid fight? I talked about making plays, but in the general play patterns of a tank in a lobby that is a real lobby, you know, people aren't dying over and over again and randomly staggering or whatever. What are you supposed to be doing? What is your target priority? First thing is try to shoot squishies as much as possible. Try not to trade as much blows with tanks unless there is some unfair parity. And here's what I mean by that. If you are in the neutral as a Strange or a Magneto, you do not want to be shooting the enemy tank because they do not care about your damage or your pressure as much as other people. If you poke a Hela twice, they're gonna have to fly away and go back to their team. If you poke an enemy Magneto twice, he might brush it off and not care at all, or get it healed over and charge the enemy support ults. This means that every squishy you shoot is going to create that much more pressure. It's going to force enemies to respond, and the more you can force enemies to respond in a way that is uncomfortable or unfavorable to them, or basically, once again, bend your will or enforce your will, this is how you really carry on tank. So a lot of players that just want to trade blowers on the front line, that is going to be one of the things you're doing wrong automatically, and I see it the most in a lot of VOD reviews. That being said, if you can create an unfair parity on the front line, that's different. And one of the best examples I have of that is when you're playing Groot. If you're playing a character like Groot and you wall off the enemy supports, you force them out of line of sight, or you don't allow the enemy front line to see their tank, now focusing the enemy tank is worth a lot of value, because there's an unfair parity there where you're getting heals and they're not. Similarly, if you are playing any tank and their tank is out of position in your backline, you can focus them in that regard, because you're being able to be pocketed and you also have the added pressure of your team, where they're out of position and not even in line of sight of their team and easy to focus by yours, and it's an unfair fight. So basically, across the board, you're trying to shoot at things that create an unfair advantage for you. In the neutral, that's typically shooting a squishy where they take damage, you take damage, you don't care about that damage because you're a tank, and that squishy, that, you know, support or DPS, they care about that damage because they could die, so it forces them to respond. And then out of position people, or, you know, situations like Groot and things like that. But also, it's super important to understand your role in a composition. How you're gonna play tank is gonna be vastly different depending on what tank you are and how you're playing. And this is a really important next step. How you play changes depending on what your comp looks like, and most importantly, what your secondary tank looks like. So there are some tanks that are far better as a secondary tank because they want full freedom. Characters like Thor, characters like Penny, these are what I would call off tanks. Tanks that supplement other tanks. They can't do the job of a tank in its entirety because they don't have the means to hold open space. They don't have any way to really protect themselves from crowd control and things like that. So they don't want to just stand in the middle of the objective. They want to play in all kinds of various positions, denying space, contesting space, making plays all the time. So these tanks are going to be really good at carrying certain games, but as the game becomes more organized, once again, in the lowest elos, things are very deathmatchy, so a lot of these rules don't apply. But as you start to climb higher and higher, and in certain lobbies, you're going to have real games where you need to trade blows, have team fights, contest objectives, and there are responsibilities that a tank needs to be able to do that an off tank has trouble doing, but they get to roam and be flexible and kind of just do whatever they want to do to create advantage for their team. And that's kind of their objective. But did you know that a tank that is traditionally a solo tank can still play the off-tank role? What I mean by that is, if you are playing, let's say, Strange Magneto, both of y'all have a shared responsibility of making sure objectives don't flip, making sure to push up and take space, but y'all also have all these extra responsibilities that you can do, because you can now be way more aggressive as Magneto chasing off an off angle. You can be way more aggressive as Strange to go and push and chase down a DPS or clear a high ground. So like as an example, let's say it's freaking, the Tokyo map on attack. A Strange could fly up to the high ground and basically sit there the entire time their team is fighting to constantly contest any DPS trying to take the high ground themselves. They never have to play with their team. They're constantly denying a certain space from the enemy team while providing pressure and potentially playmaking. This is weird because you couldn't really do this as a solo tank, but you can do this in this regard because you have another tank that fulfills part of the responsibilities for you. But of course, if that person dies in a complex team fight where everyone's getting traded out and you need to be an anchor on the objective, that could be something that you need to do in the moment, but it's not something you always have to do. So it's important that you're changing how you play and how aggressive you are relative to who else is playing with you. But on the flip side, if you're a solo tank, there's a lot more responsibilities on your shoulders that you need to do and a little less freedom that comes with it, especially if you're just completely abandoning your team to go constantly play make and never play objectives. It can give your team a hard time understanding how to play or what to do unless everyone on your team is playing mobility heavy characters. In addition to that, your life is much more valuable when you have a very important responsibility that you alone have, and I think a lot of solo tanks can carry just by doing many of those fundamentals right. Yes, still make plays. Yes, still enforce your will, but just understand how that changes slightly when you're solo tanking, when you're duo tanking, who you're tanking with. This all matters. Another thing is, sometimes you need to completely change how you play depending on what the enemy composition is. Let's take Emma, for example. She's a perfect example in this meta, but there's a lot of dive characters running around. In a general poke mirror, let's say you're playing the Emma Magneto mirror up against the enemy team. You want to build up your beam, poke at the front line, potentially slightly off angle, and make plays and punish enemy Magnetos that walk too forward. This means that you're constantly trying to build up your beam so you have high beam damage so you can play make, and you're going to be playing the front line, which makes the most sense. However, if you're up against an enemy team, let's say you're still on that Magneto Emma, but they're on Cap Venom, you almost never want to play the front line. You would much rather play more passively with your team. Now, this comes at the cost of not building up your beam, but that doesn't matter because all you're trying to do is deny their plays. In the neutral, you're still more effective than them. You have a barrier. You could still provide value to your team. Your Magneto is going to be more effective at poking the front line than their Cap and Venom. So as long as you can position in a way to deny their dive, you're going to be effective. And so that means that you forego building charge. You forego playing the front line. And that is weird because you're always thinking, I need to build charge, I need to build charge. But if you're on the front line building charge while your team is getting jumped to the back line and you're not in a position to grab anybody or stun anybody, then what are you really doing? You're not adapting your play depending on what the enemy team is doing, and it could really cost you games very easily. Now, the next role we got to talk about is definitely DPS. And there's a lot of mistakes that players on DPS are making that is preventing them from really climbing to the next rank. They hit a plateau. So what can you actually do to make sure you're consistent, getting tons of value, and carrying team fights over and over again? The first thing we need to talk about is adapting encounters. I think a lot of DPS have a general idea what they want their games to go like when they select a certain character, but there's always certain matchups and different things that you should consider. How you should play those matchups is really important for you to learn. So let's say you're, for some reason, a Black Panther main this season. I think one of the problems with a lot of dive players in general is they just kind of walk out and look around and see what is in front of them and just go on it right away. But I want you to take a breather and look and see what on the enemy team do you have favorable or unfavorable matchups against, and how can you be effective into that. So as an example, you look at their composition and you know there are certain characters that you don't want to fight. Maybe they have a Bucky, maybe they have a Rocket. These are characters you don't really love to interact with, but then you see, oh, they have a Luna, and that Luna is your target. Identifying that target before you even see them, before you even walk out, before you even go and play make is really important. So you're identifying who is the vulnerability, how can you get consistent value? And I think one of the things all DPS players should do is think about where is that consistent value going to come from? Who are the characters that I should consistently focus and that I should build my game plan around, not just running out and just playing it as you see it. I think that's what a lot of divers do, but especially if there's a couple of fights where your engagements don't go the way you want to, I want you to slow down, like slow down a lot and really think about how you're going to fight, who you're going to fight, and the best way to create the type of engagement you want, because this might mean being extremely patient. This might mean routing in a weird way to deny the line of sight of a Bucky, let the Bucky walk forward, make sure that you don't engage when the Bucky is actively fighting. Maybe you're waiting for certain cooldowns to go out before you engage because there's a certain cooldown the enemy has that is really messing up your engagement. But something else that you should be thinking about is the idea of adapting versus countering. So there's a ton of counters in Marvel Rivals, characters that have favorable matchups against certain characters, but the reality of it is you can't just swap when you see any counter. Like Moon Knight isn't great against Psylocke and Iron Man isn't great against Hela, but if you swap off every time you see just a singular counter, you're never adapting to still be effective. And there's a lot of characters that they can easily adapt and still dominate even characters that do have a slightly favored matchup against them. That's why it's your responsibility to not only know your targets, but also know the characters that you're most wary of and how you can play in a way that makes it really hard for them to be effective. Because on the very same vein as I need to go and target the Luna on Black Panther, in that analogy, if you're playing Iron Man against the Hela, all that Hela's thinking about is I need to go and target the Iron Man and destroy him because that's all their team is yelling at them to do. Why aren't you shooting at the Iron Man? Why aren't you shooting at the Iron Man? So understand that if you can minimize their effectiveness, you not only make it so that you're, denying the best thing that they could be doing, but you're potentially also tilting their team one way or another. But really what's important here is that matchup is extremely important to how the entire game plays out, because if that Hela gets shut down or minimized in her effectiveness, then they're heavily relying on that person to deal with you or engage you in favorable ways. And that means that you're much more freed up as long as you play around this one thing. It's like, I have a game plan, and this is the biggest op to my game plan. This is the biggest stop counter to my game plan. And as long as I make sure that this one thing is not effective, or if I play in a way that minimizes that person's effectiveness, then once that person is out of the picture, or even in spite of them being around, I can be very, very dominant and effective in this match. Now, to give you some actual examples of what that would look like, this means that as Iron Man, you're playing far more passive. You're making sure to constantly track the enemy Hela's position. You're constantly playing around natural cover, and you're playing far safer to spam, never playing in open space, or you're never playing to beam people down and push people in, because then you're open and, vulnerable to that Hela. But the second the Hela is out of the picture or in an angle where you can push her effectively, you wrap around the map and take really close range angles on her to kill her. And once she's dead, you can play much more in the open, much more in the skybox, or even push people really aggressively in the air because there's less people that could shut you down because the Hela's out of the picture. Understand that the whole game revolves around that one thing. And I think in a lot of situations, the gameplay that you play as a DPS should revolve around who is your best and worst matchups, or who can you feast on and who are you most afraid of, and how do you change your playstyle around those things, because that can be the difference, right? And there are going to be some situations where there's too many things to deal with, right? If the enemy team is completely stacked to shut you down, you're once again playing a diver and they're playing freaking the Thing, freaking Emma, Namor, Bucky, all this shit, you're gonna have a hard time. And you need to be realistic about, yeah, I could just get some free value on these other characters. And I think it's important to understand that swapping off isn't saying that you're worse or saying that you couldn't cut it as your character. If they want to do all that for you, that means that you did your job extremely well, forcing them off of tons of characters they would rather play, to play characters instead that just shut down your main character. And if they swap out, you could swap back, steal some wins in a clutch overtime. So I think it's really important that you're reasonable and realistic about what you can adapt to and what is too hard to adapt to, and you can whip out another character in your pool that doesn't get shut down by the same things. Now, another thing that's important is that mechanical skill is most important for the DPS role out of any other role, and you can't really escape it. Now, this is going to be more or less true depending on the specific hero that you're playing, but in general, DPS players need to be more focused on their mechanics than other roles by quite a margin, and it really impacts everything. I want to make it clear that mechanics really impact everything you do in a hero shooter, and it's one of the most important things that is like a glue that holds together positioning and game sense. Like, let me give you this example. Let's say that you make the right game sense play on paper. As an example, you're, I don't know, Hella, and you're pushing a 1 HP person, someone that is literally one shot in the body. You round the corner, you know they're there, so you just fly around the corner, and as long as you hit one shot in like 3 seconds, you win that fight. So the game sense says, yes, you need to pursue that duel, you need to actually go for that duel, you need to make that play. But if your mechanics don't follow suit with what your game sense tells you to do, you could just die, and you could lose that game and that fight because of your mechanical skill purely, even if you did everything right. From your positioning to your game sense, mechanics ultimately is the ability to execute actions at a consistent and reliable rate. Being able to rely on your aim, being able to rely on your ability to hit shots, knowing that you will. And there are a lot of characters in the DPS roster that requires you to be confident in your mechanics in order to make plays that should make sense. Like if there's an isolated person on the high ground and you can just fly up there, stun them, and headshot them on Hella. A very straightforward task, but if you cannot accomplish it, that's a play you just can't really go for reliably, or if you do go for it, there's a failure rate. This is why I think there's a responsibility of all DPS players to focus on their mechanics and get better aim and mechanical skill, because you never want the takeaway from a game to be, if I would have aimed better, I would have actually won. I don't want that to be your takeaway ever. I want your takeaway to be, I should have positioned better. I should have had better effective ranges. I should have had better matchups. I should have thought about their abilities more. I should have used my abilities better. These are the things I want you to think about. I don't want you to be, oh wow, I just whiffed 3 shots right in front of me because I don't have a reasonable amount of mechanical skill. This is not acceptable as a DPS player. And something that I think is super underrated is just going into the training room, going underneath and just shooting at Luna bots that move sporadically. And you can do some really simple stuff like turn off cooldowns and practice. One of the things that I did is I practiced Hella headshots, stun, headshot. I got quite a bit better at that, just doing it for like 5-10 minutes before every play session when I was grinding DPS. And then on Wolverine, I went in and I practiced, clawing in and gripping. For the longest time, I would always be very inconsistent with my Wolverine grips. But after I practiced this for like 10 minutes, I got so much better so quickly, because you got to think about it. How many times do you get to practice your grips in a game? I don't know. You get to go for like maybe 10, 15 over the course of an entire long game. Well, in the training room, you could do 15 in the matter of like, I don't know, 30 seconds. You could do so many repetitions. Really get a feel for the hitbox of the Wolverine grab. Really get a feel for how the stun on Hella is going to move a target before you headshot. Really get a feel for how you hook somebody and hook them in as Bucky and then 180 pin them. Like, you get to practice all these mechanical actions, become reliable at them so that you can rely on them in your games. Super important. The last tip I'll give for you on DPS is about reading the team fight, and it's about how you should play in the moment, because depending on how the team fight is playing out between you, your team, and the enemy team, it could dramatically change how you should be playing in that moment. This is why it's really important to know what ultimates your team has, because there's going to be times and certain situations where it's really good for you to be really active, proactive, make plays, go for plays. But there are going to be other times where you need to remain super passive, idle, and wait for certain things to happen. What I mean by that is, if you are waiting for your like Luna to get ult and they're at like 85% ult, in this moment, you do not want to be hyper aggressive. If you're hyper aggressive and you go for a play and you play make really hard and then die, because every play comes with risk, and then your Luna pops ult, you're not around to fight in the ultimate, you're not around to trade blows with the enemy, you're not around to benefit from that ult, and most importantly, after the ults are over from your team and the enemy team, you're not there to make plays after the fact. Let's make this even simpler. Let's say you're Psylocke. There are going to be times where you want to go for some aggressive plays, some aggressive off angles, go for the backline, go for a kill. But when I VOD review Psylocks, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Psylocke be at 70, 80% ultimate, die making an aggressive play. And if they would have just played really passive, built their ultimate and ulted, the enemy team didn't have anything to stop them. They would have just won the fight. And I think it's important to understand that there's a certain opportunity cost with everything that you're doing. And there are times where being really passive is actually the correct thing to do. And there are times when being really proactive is the right thing to do. I think a great example of that is if you can track enemy ultimates, and let's say you have no defensive ultimates, or maybe no ultimates on your team, and the enemy team have a lot, and it's one fight. Let's say they're at 99, you're almost at 99 on a King of the Hill. They're gonna walk in, they got all these ults, y'all don't have any. Now, if you're close to a support ult or something like that, y'all could play passive and stall for time, try to get that support ult, draw out the fight, try to get that ult, and then maybe build some other ults. You could try for that, but if you don't have any ults at all, what do? Do you just sit there and wait for the enemy to just Groot ult, Moon Knight ult you with Luna ult as a backup and you just die? Oftentimes in these situations, you want to play for something higher risk. You want to go on the super aggressive flank. You want to be in their backline. Because how many times have you been on a team where you're like, oh wow, we just walk in and win right now, we have so many ultimates, and then your support just dies behind you and you're like, wait, what the heck? Oh, wait, there's a flanking Bucky. What the fuck is going on? And then y'all lose. Y'all lose the game. Y'all lose the fight. Ults get dumped and they're dumped incorrectly. And then you're crashing out. And this is what you need to do on the flip side. There are certain time periods where you need to just play straight up based on your ultimates, play at the tempo of the team fight, play with your team, play passive. And there are other times where playmaking could be the right thing. And there are other times where, you know, going even to an extreme level of playmaking is the right play when there's nothing else tangible you could rely on your team, no ultimates coming up or anything like that. Now, last but certainly not least, we have supports. And the first thing I want to talk about flat out is dealing with dive. I think support players are having a lot of trouble with dive right now. There's even clips going viral of support players dying instantly to Panthers and other dive characters. And they're like, there's no way I could deal with this. There's no way I could have reacted to that. And here's the secret that I want to give you, the secret sauce that I want to tell you about dealing with dive. Most dive is not going to be shut down with reaction and mechanics. Like, yes, this is possible. Yes, this is something you could potentially do if you have tons of experience, tons of mechanical skill, tons of practice, but most importantly, if you're ready for the dive. And a lot of dives come out of nowhere. You don't expect them. You don't know what to do because they put you on the back foot. That's literally what dive can do, is they take all the tempo of the fight and they force you to play always in a situation where you're not prepared and ready. So oftentimes when you are getting jumped on by like two divers or a diver, you've already lost. Like, the fight is already over if that is the first time that you identify the diver. If you don't know that they're there until they jump you. And it's okay to die that first death, but I want to see what you do on your second life, your third life. I really think there's three things that you need to do in order to deal with dive most adequately. Number one is scout, knowing where enemies are, head on a swivel, looking around, try to identify where divers are coming from and know that they're coming ahead of time, basically always being ready to be jumped on at any given moment. Another thing that's super important is the best kind of peel is by your other support and being extremely close to them or in their line of sight, and really helping out your other support is, I think, very, very important. This is why support duos can be really powerful, especially if one of y'all can flex, because y'all can look out for each other, y'all can peel for each other, and it's super easy for two supports that are, you know, protecting each other to deny basically dive from any one character. Yeah, you can still struggle with multiple characters that are diving you, but any one Spider-Man, any one Black Panther, any one Cap, you're just gonna completely not care about them as long as you're actively peeling and helping each other. And the last part about this is swap. I think this is something that a lot of support players just don't do enough. Just like how a DPS diver will swap off if they're playing a ton of counters. If you're playing a certain character and constantly getting dove and you're not getting any PO or help for your team, there are other supports that have the means to survive and will never get dove. There are certain characters that are extremely hard to dive. Characters like Loki, characters like Rocket, certain characters like, hell, even Jeff. There are characters that keep you alive. And if you become that easy point of value, we talked about this in the DPS category, the easy point of value for someone on the enemy team, it is your job to solve that problem, period. Because regardless of what PO you're getting or not getting, the reality of it is is if you keep dying to the enemy divers, you are becoming the hole that creates a route to victory for the enemy team. You're the vulnerability. Now, I know you might be saying, Mills, I need peelers to help me. I need someone to help me. I need people to turn around. Even the devs said that people need to peel for their supports. So it's not my fault. And we're not blaming fault here, but I'm going to be really honest with you for a second because I know you're someone that really wants to get better and you really want to climb. Constant peeling is something that players, even in the highest ranks, don't get. They don't get constant peel. They get peel much more than you probably get in your rank, but even the best players don't get constant peel. So I want you to understand that if you expect peel to deal with these problems, you're screaming into the void. I would say communicate as much as you can to try to create these things. And if you really want peel, I would highly recommend duoing or trioing. But the reality of it is you are not going to get players that peel a lot in your games because if they did, they would be in a higher rank. So just make sure that after you have adapted, after you scout, after you route better and play with your team better and communicate as much as you can, if you are the hole or the opening or the opportunity for the enemy divers to consistently get value every single time, then you might need to consider swapping or completely adapting how you play because other supports are climbing based on how they still thrive, even in spite of the things that they want. And that's kind of true with all things. DPSs are rewarded for how impactful they are, even in spite of how little space they have from bad tanks. Tank players are impacted by how much they can do, even in spite of poor supports and poor DPS. It's not about how you can perform when you have all the things that you want. It's about how much you can do, even when you don't have any of the things that you need. Now, another thing that you should consider here is how you're positioning. I think high ground in general is one of the most broken things up against divers, but also just against anything. High ground is just very, very strong. If you're a support on the high ground, there's a lot of characters that just can't walk up to you. You know, if you're playing in a position where a tank can just walk right up to you, that's one thing. But if you're playing the high ground, a Magneto can't walk up to the high ground unless he wraps around. And there are tons of divers that, you know, they fly off the edges and it's really hard for them to hit you when you're on the high ground. And I want you to think of high ground as free mobility because at any moment you can jump from the high ground to the low ground in a pinch. But after the fight is over, I want you to make sure that you reposition to the high ground. Another thing about positioning is that it's going to change dramatically depending on what you're up against. So like if you're up against a diver or dive team, you typically want to position a lot tighter to each other, right? Right next to your other DPS, right next to your support, right next to your Bucky, right next to your Luna, so that you're really protected and y'all can see each other and y'all could dump cooldowns on the divers that are coming after you. But when you're playing against other types of comps that don't have hypermobility characters chasing you or isolating you, you want to make sure that you're spreading out more. You're changing the angles that you're playing. If you're Invisible Woman, you're not playing right behind your tanks necessarily. Maybe you're playing an off angle. You have a Luna right behind. You have an off-angling Invisible Woman that can play a more aggressive position, allowing you to play make, pull people in, and still not get punished because you have that jump into Invis. And I think what you can get away with your positioning is an important thing to recognize because some positions are going to get you killed up against certain comps, but you don't need to play that safe, and there is a cost to being that safe. Up against divers, you don't need as much mid-fight value because all you have to do is deny the dive. That's the most important thing. But up against other poke compositions, as an example, you want to position in a space where you're trading more damage, trading more heals, being more effective with your abilities. So that's just something to consider how your positioning is changing depending on the comp, and you should never default to the same position all the time. Now, the last thing to consider is your ultimate use. I think this is one of the most important ways that a support player can carry or throw a game, and it's really important that you get right. The first one is to never double support ult. I know this one can be a bit hard without any communication, but if you can't speak it, I would highly recommend typing it or just call the shots if the other person isn't communicating as well. Say, I'll go first, or you use yours for this ult is a good way to do that as well. Such a simple way to lose a game, but it's a way that players even in high ranks lose games. It's just very avoidable and something that you absolutely need to do because dumping 2 ultimates to deny like a Psylocke ult and then just dying to everything else is gonna cost you a game. Another thing that you need to do with your ultimates is delay the timing of your ultimate. This is particularly for defensive ultimates on supports. I see a lot of support mains just responding to their support ult with your support ult. And while this can be sometimes necessary, most of the time there is a certain amount of delay that you can have. So this concept is called sandbagging, where you're waiting as long as possible to utilize a certain ability or ultimate. And the idea here is that if they Luna ult first, right, and they pop it, they get everyone healed, and then they start walking forward, your team doesn't need your Luna ult until they're about to die. And that might not be right away. It might be 2 seconds, it might be 4 seconds, hell, it might be half the ultimate. And the longer you can wait, the better, because that means your ultimate will last after theirs is done, right? If you can wait 4 seconds, then after the 12 seconds of their ultimate, you will have an additional 4 seconds of yours. You wait 6, you'll have 6. The idea here is that you're trying to get more value on the back end by delaying as much as possible. And in some cases, it might even be correct to not use it at all. If they're not in a position to push you or pressure you, and your team is in a position where y'all can just back up and give a little space, then you can save that ult. You don't have to use it to mirror their ults. And oftentimes I see way too many supports mirroring enemy support ults, and then you don't have your ult for whatever other DPS ult they have. If they have Star-Lord, Psylocke, Groot, you need your ultimates to deny those things. And if you're just using it to rival the enemy defensive ult, that's really bad, because oftentimes you use an offensive ult to bait out theirs, and then you're matching theirs, so they're taking out 2 of your ultimates, 1 defensive, 1 offensive, for their 1 defensive ultimate, which is a terrible trade, but I see it done all the time in all the VOD reviews I look at. Now, even though I gave you tips on every single role, I really feel like I only went surface level. So if you want in-depth guides over certain roles or certain characters, let me know in the comments down below. I have several advanced positioning guides I'm working on right now over certain maps, different angles that you can take, and ways to position to start to dominate. So definitely smash that like and subscribe so you don't miss out on those videos. And thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.